political prisoner was imprisoned because he opposed the racism practiced by his government against the people. Determined, he decided he would do the impossible to escape. However, he was imprisoned on the second floor, making it impossible to dig a tunnel or escape through the window. The only option left was to exit through the door, but the problem was that his cell had two doors, an inner door and an outer door. The outer door couldn't even be opened from the inside, as the lock was on the outside. Beyond these two doors, there were 8 more he needed to bypass to get out of the prison. 10 doors in total. This situation might seem to make escape impossible, but this prisoner was planning to use his intelligence to create highly innovative tools. These tools would assist him in breaking through all the doors to execute his escape. So, what are these tools, and how did he craft them while inside the prison? Stay tuned for the story. Our story unfolds in the 1970s in South Africa, a country long afflicted by colonial rule, notably under the British and the Dutch. As a result of this colonization, South Africa became the African nation with the largest population of white Europeans. Despite being a minority, this white community enforced apartheid, a system of racial segregation against the native black and African populations. Under apartheid, whites had their exclusive, well-maintained, and orderly neighborhoods, while blacks were systematically excluded and forced to live in impoverished, squalid conditions under extremely difficult circumstances. This system of apartheid persisted in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. The native South Africans, particularly the Africans, resisted and fought against this oppressive regime. Nelson Mandela, a prominent symbol of this resistance, took up arms against apartheid and was imprisoned for 27 years. He later became the first African president of South Africa after the fall of apartheid. Although apartheid benefited the white population, there were honorable white individuals who opposed it. Our story begins with 2 such people, Tim Jenkins and Stephen Lee. 2 South Africans, both white and both activists against the apartheid regime. On one occasion, Tim Jenkins was carrying what appeared to be a bomb in a bag, which he placed on a street, and which suddenly exploded. It turned out to be a leaflet bomb, dispersing papers containing a message urging both white and black citizens to resist the government and its apartheid policies. These 2 men, Jenkins and his friend Stephen Lee, continued their resistance activities for years. However, like any repressive government, South Africa's security forces at the time were stringent. With extensive surveillance, spying, and intelligence systems in place, the authorities eventually caught on to them. Security forces stormed their homes and arrested Tim and Stephen. They were imprisoned in January 1978 in Pretoria Central Prison, considered one of the most secure facilities in the country, a maximum security prison designed to deter any escape attempts. The charges laid against them were terrorism, and they were sentenced to 12 years. What the prison guards did not know was that these 2 men were determined to escape even before they were convicted. For them, staying in prison for the duration of their sentence was unthinkable. However, escaping from such a fortified prison was daunting. The prison's perimeter was enclosed by a 6-meter-high metal fence. Armed guards patrolled the prison roofs at all times, and at night, dogs were released into the prison yards. These dogs were trained to detect and swiftly chase down any inmate attempting to escape. When the guards first escorted Tim and his friend Stephen to their cells, they were struck by the sheer number of doors they passed through, one after another. Some were heavy, others made of bars, and some were just ordinary wooden doors. It felt as if the prison was made entirely of doors. From their very first days, whenever they were let out for breaks, they constantly explored every nook and cranny, scrutinizing the walls, exits, and entrances, looking for any potential weaknesses. They knew from the outset that escaping would be a complex challenge. Tim and Stephen were not alone as political prisoners in the jail. There were 10 others with them, making a total of 12. They were all placed in the same section, with their cells adjacent to one another. This section was on the second floor, making traditional escape methods like tunneling impractical due to their location, and the windows were too high to offer any feasible exit route. The only way out seemed to be through the cell door, which, of course, was locked. Tim, while not an expert locksmith, had some experience with locks. He used to tinker with them occasionally, using wires to manipulate their mechanisms, giving him a general understanding of how locks worked. He approached the lock on his cell door and studied it intently, visualizing its internal components and imagining the shape of the key that could open it. Then, an idea struck him. He took a piece of paper, pressed it against the lock, and sketched the dimensions of the lock. He wanted to determine the size of the key needed. Afterward, he folded another piece of paper, took a pen, and inserted them together into the lock. This time, his goal was to gauge the depth of the lock. These experiments with paper and pens were aimed at obtaining precise measurements for the key. Keep in mind that this was in the year 1978, and locks were not as sophisticated as they are today. Ultimately, Tim managed to sketch a blueprint for a key based on the dimensions he believed matched the original. Now that he had the measurements, the next challenge was how to actually create this key. He came up with the idea to craft it from wood, given that they were put to work in the prison's carpentry workshop, where they were allowed to make various wooden items. A wooden key was certainly unconventional and quite peculiar. When Tim shared this idea with his friend Stephen was skeptical. He doubted that a wooden key could unlock the door, even if the measurements were accurate. Nonetheless, they figured they had nothing to lose by trying. Tim began crafting the key during his shifts in the workshop, under the watchful eyes of the guards, which made the task anything but easy. Stephen always tried to cover for him. After a full week, Tim finally succeeded in making the key. However, the next challenge was smuggling the key out of the workshop. Prisoners were usually searched when leaving the workshop, so how could he get the key out without the guards discovering it? The answer lay in a coffee cup or thermos they were allowed to carry. Each prisoner had a cup, but these two were subject to search, with guards typically pouring out any remaining coffee into the sink to ensure nothing was hidden inside them. Tim discovered that the base of his coffee cup could be detached, revealing a small hidden compartment suitable for concealing the key. He opened this base and filled it with paper to stabilize the key inside, ensuring that it wouldn't move or make noise if the cup was shaken. This clever trick meant that if a guard shook the cup, they wouldn't hear the key rattling around inside. As the prisoners lined up to exit the workshop, the guard began the routine inspection, taking each inmate's coffee cup, pouring out any remaining coffee into the sink, and verifying that it was empty. When it was Tim's turn, he was nervous but managed to maintain a calm demeanor. The guard opened his cup, poured out the coffee, and shook it to ensure nothing was hidden inside. Thanks to the paper stuffing in the base, the guard found nothing suspicious and handed the cup back to Tim, who then returned to his cell with the wooden key concealed within it. Once back in his cell, and after the guards had left the section, Tim eagerly tried the key in the lock. His initial excitement quickly faded when the key didn't work. The lock wouldn't open. However, Tim had anticipated this possibility. He had chosen wood not just randomly, but strategically, as he turned the wooden key inside the lock. The lock's pins left marks on the wood, indicating where the key was getting stuck. With a small metal piece, Tim began meticulously carving at these mark areas on the key, fine-tuning its shape to match the lock's requirements. He would carve a bit, then try the key in the lock, then carve some more, continually refining the key's shape based on where it got stuck. After repeated adjustments and attempts, the wooden key finally turned the lock successfully. At that moment, Tim felt an indescribable rush of triumph and exhilaration, as if he had achieved something truly monumental. Tim knew that opening the first lock was just the beginning. The door he had unlocked was the barred entrance to his cell, but immediately behind this door was a second, solid steel door, fully intact, not merely bars, and significantly more formidable. Worse still, This door could not be unlocked from the inside. It was designed to be opened only from the outside, and Tim was well aware of this challenge. He wasn't caught off guard by its presence. He understood there were two barriers to his cell, and after unlocking the barred door, he would have to contend with the second door, which had no internal lock. However, Tim's strategy was to tackle one problem at a time. There was a small window next to the door through which a prisoner could extend an arm, but it was impossible to reach the external lock from this position. Regardless, before he could attempt to unlock it from within his cell, he first needed to create the right key for this lock. Tim's only chance to take measurements of the external lock was on Fridays, which were cleaning days. Every Friday morning, the guards would remove the prisoners from their cells to clean the corridors and the area in front of the cells. Conveniently, all the prisoners in this section were political detainees who were cooperative and supportive of Tim and Stephen's efforts. They were all aware of the plan and actively covered for them, alerting them whenever the guards were approaching. This collective effort provided Tim with the necessary cover and opportunity to gather the measurements needed for crafting a key to the outer door's lock. Initially, Tim attempted to use the same key he had crafted for the inner door on the outer steel door, but it failed to work. Undeterred, he measured the lock in the same manner he had for the first one, using paper and a pen to sketch a rough outline of the key, and then creating it in the workshop. He smuggled it out again, hidden in his coffee cup. He continued to test and adjust the key with a small iron piece, refining it as he had done with the first key, until it finally fit the lock. Remember, Tim was testing this while the door was open during the cleaning period, so when he first tried the new key, it locked the door, but then refused to unlock it. The lock was jammed. The key could slide in and out without issue, but it wouldn't turn. The lock's bolt was protruding and wouldn't retract. Despite his efforts to manipulate it with the key and even try to force it, nothing worked. As the cleaning time was ending and the guards were about to return, Tim had to stop and retreat to his cell. When the guards saw the jammed lock, instead of suspecting the prisoners of tampering with it, they blamed each other, assuming one of them had left it in that state. They did not suspect the prisoners at all, which was a stroke of luck for Tim. The guards simply used their keys to unlock and relock the door, then closed it again. Tim breathed a sigh of relief, terrified that they might search his cell and find the wooden keys. Fortunately, things worked out in his favor this time, and his secret remained safe. After this incident, Tim and Stephen decided that they wouldn't attempt to test the lock while the door was open anymore. Now they would only try it when the door was closed. They faced the main problem. The external door lock could only be opened from the outside, and the small window next to the door was too far away for them to reach the lock by hand. For a long time, they pondered over this issue, searching for a solution. Inspiration struck Tim one day. The prisoners were allowed to keep their cleaning brooms in their cells, and Tim used this to his advantage. Tim devised an innovative tool. He attached a wooden cube to the end of the broomstick and secured the key to it with a screw. This setup allowed him to extend the stick and rotate the wooden piece, and thus the key, inside the lock. However, trying such an invention was risky because it could make noise, and the guards conducted random inspection rounds. Stephen took on the role of lookout, keeping his eyes and ears open for any approaching guards. Tim carefully extended the broomstick out of the small window, even tying it to his wrist with a string to ensure that if it fell, he could easily retrieve it. He used one hand to manipulate the key into the lock and held a small mirror in the other to see where the lock was because he couldn't stick his head out due to the bars on the window. Despite the complexity of the operation, after many attempts, Tim finally managed to get the key into the lock. He took a deep breath, relieved and excited, and then tried to turn the key. Unfortunately, the key didn't turn. Undeterred, Tim retracted the broomstick and began to work on the key again with the small iron piece, determined to make the necessary adjustments for it to work. The marks left by the lock were clearly visible on the key, guiding Tim on where he needed to carve to ensure the key would fit perfectly. He spent several nights working tirelessly, dedicating hours each night to refining the key. Imagine that this painstaking process took him 2 whole months, during which he had to remake the key multiple times. It was an extremely challenging task, but Tim never gave up and persisted until one day, after hundreds, possibly thousands, of attempts, the lock finally opened. The joy Tim felt at that moment was indescribable, perhaps the greatest he had ever experienced in his life. It was a tremendous victory for them. Now, they could easily open both doors of their cells, since all the cells used the same type of lock. Next, they had to tackle the door leading to their section, which they could only attempt to unlock during the cleaning period every Friday morning. Before Tim started crafting a new key, he decided to try the keys he already had on this door, just in case. To their sweet surprise, the first key he tried, which was the one for the inner door, unlocked the section door. They had used the same lock type on this door as well. The relief and joy they experienced were profound, saving them significant effort and time. This breakthrough meant they could now focus on planning their next steps, rather than worrying about creating another key. Now that they were able to open both their cell doors and the door to their section, Tim and Stephen began to strategize further. Originally, their plan was to escape from the prison yard, either by digging a tunnel beneath the ground or by somehow scaling the 6-meter-high metal fence. However, Tim suggested to Stephen, why not exit through the main entrance or the staff door or any other door that leads outside? If he could make keys for all these doors, he argued, he could likely make keys for any other doors they might encounter. Stephen felt the idea was a bit crazy, as they didn't know how many doors they would face or where exactly these doors might lead them outside. They didn't have a map of the prison to plan their exact route from their cells and section to the outside. Stephen came up with a plan. He feigned severe tooth pain. Since there was no dentist in the prison, they had to take him out to see one. This would allow him to count the number of doors they would need to pass through and discover the exact route they would need to follow. After his visit to the dentist, Stephen returned with some daunting news. He had passed through 7 doors after leaving their section, meaning they would have to bypass a total of 10 doors to escape the prison. At least now they had a clear path laid out for their escape. At this stage, feeling the need for additional help, they considered expanding their team. Over the past few months, they have befriended another prisoner named Alex Mumbar, who was incarcerated on similar charges. When they shared their escape plan with him, Alex was immediately enthusiastic. He had wanted to join them but had been reluctant to impose himself. Now, with a clearer plan and an extra member on their team, their chances of escaping seemed more tangible than ever. Stephen explained their escape route, which involved navigating through a series of doors they would need to unlock. To help them visualize, he drafted a diagram of the path and the doors. Starting from their cells, the first 2 doors, labeled Door 1 and Door 2, lead out of the cell area. Once they exit their cells, they face Door 3, the section door. Crossing this, they encounter a staircase leading downstairs, since their section is on the 2nd floor. At the bottom of the stairs lies Door 4. Exiting this door, they enter a hallway that leads to Door 5. However, before reaching Door 5, there is the main guard room, typically occupied by the on-duty guard. Beyond Door 5, they progress to Doors 6, 7, which is a barred door, 8, and 9. Following Door 9, a small staircase leads to Door 10, the final exit door, which seems to be a staff or service entrance used by guards for direct access, thus bypassing the main entrance. Exiting through Door 10 allows them to leave directly without having to cross the prison yard or scale the fence, avoiding the guard dogs and the watchful eyes of armed guards on the rooftops. However, the real challenge lies in navigating through all the doors ahead of them. While Stephen's plan is a simplified version, the prison is much more complex than this diagram suggests. Nonetheless, the diagram is crucial for them to understand the path they need to follow and to keep a clear image of the place in mind. So far, they have managed to get past the first 3 doors. The next door was door number 4, which was encountered after descending the stairs. This door is familiar to them, as it is used daily for access to the workshop and the prison yard, among other areas, allowing them to observe the guards opening it regularly. This gave Tim the opportunity to study the shape and size of the key and try to memorize it. The key wasn't much different from the previous ones, so he created a rough copy of it from memory. Testing this door was a bigger risk since it wasn't near their cells or the section door. Moving out of their cells and section and descending the stairs to reach this door involved significant risk. To minimize the danger, they needed to carefully plan and observe the guards' routines. One key piece of information they discovered was that after 5 p.m., there was only one guard responsible for their section. Additionally, while the guard dogs were released in the outer yard and armed guards were stationed on the rooftops, they didn't need to venture into the outdoor yard, but just needed to be cautious of the indoor guard, who typically stayed in the guard office. There were different guards on the night shift, but one guard preferred it over others due to his liking for night duties. Fortunately for the prisoners, this guard had a predictable routine that never changed. Every night, the guard would play music through the prison's internal sound system, with speakers installed in the cells. This meant he would sit in his office, relax, and listen to music, and the prisoners could listen along. Once the music stopped, he would leave his office and conduct a cell inspection tour. This routine allowed the prisoners to be certain of his whereabouts when the music was playing, so they used this opportunity to make their move. Tim, along with Alex, took advantage of the music playing to slip out of their cells. They quietly passed through door 3, the section door, descended the stairs, and reached door 4 below, where they began to test the new key they had crafted. As usual, the key didn't work on the first attempt, but Tim was prepared. With his tool in hand, he quickly began adjusting the key. By now, Tim had become quite adept at this task, and things went more smoothly than before. Unlike the cell door, which had taken them 2 grueling months to open using a makeshift key extended by a broomstick, door 4 was more straightforward. They managed to adjust the key and open the lock quickly on their first attempt downstairs. They then swiftly ascended back to their section and cells, just minutes before the music stopped and the night guard began his inspection rounds. This precise timing allowed them to avoid any suspicion and return to their cells unnoticed. Now they could open 4 out of the 10 doors. However, the further they progressed, the more difficult the task became as the doors were increasingly farther from their cells. Door 5 was particularly challenging since it was directly in front of the guard's office. How could they possibly approach and experiment with this door while the guard might be right next to them, given the high risks involved? Getting caught would severely increase their sentences. They needed a way to work on door 5 without the guard being in the office. The only time the guard wasn't in the office was during his inspection rounds. He would leave the office, walk through the corridor, and then ascend the stairs to their cells. How could they manage to leave their cells and reach door 5 using the same route without running into him? They would meet him halfway. The solution they devised was to hide under the staircase. They noticed a small cupboard there, large enough for 2 or 3 people to conceal themselves. Knowing the guard's routine of playing music and then leaving his office for inspection rounds, they planned to leave their cells while the music was playing. They would wait for the guard to leave his office, pass through door 4, and ascend the stairs to their section. Meanwhile, they would emerge from hiding under the stairs in the small cupboard and proceed to door number 5 to conduct their trials. After reviewing and rehearsing their plans several times until they knew it by heart, they decided to take the risk and proceed with it. It was the best plan they could think of. The first step involved arranging their blankets in such a way that it appeared someone was sleeping under them. This was crucial because the guard would inspect their cells while they were gone, and they needed him to believe they were still there, asleep. As soon as the music started, that was their cue to move. The first task was to unlock the outer door of their cell. Tim grabbed the broomstick and struggled to fit the key into the lock, a process that was never easy and required multiple attempts. Once he finally managed to unlock it, he opened his cell door, then immediately went to Alex's cell to open his door, and both quickly exited through the section door and descended the stairs to the small cupboard under the staircase where they hid themselves, both extremely tense. For the first time, they were outside their cells with a guard about to pass right by them. An unforeseen problem arose when they entered the small cupboard. The handles were on the outside, and inside there was only a small lock latch the size of a coin. Alex, holding the door, was trembling. His fingers barely kept a grip on the small latch, his nerves in fear making his hands slick with sweat. Just as the guard reached door 4 and they heard him unlocking it, Alex's grip slipped due to the trembling and sweat. The cupboard door swung open just as the guard was entering through the door. It was the worst possible scenario. Tim and Alex thought this was the end for them, certain they were about to be caught. But, as usual, luck was on their side. The guard didn't notice them or the cupboard door that had swung open right in front of him. His focus was entirely on the stairs. He stepped up and continued on his way without a glance at the cupboard or its open door. Despite the tension and fear gripping Tim and Alex, they knew they had no time to waste. As soon as they heard the guard enter the cell section door above, they quickly emerged from the cupboard and headed towards door 4. Fortunately, the guard had left it unlocked, so they didn't even need to use the key they had prepared. It seemed to be the guard's habit to leave doors open behind him as he headed towards the cells, not expecting any prisoners to be behind him. The two passed through door 4 and went straight to the corridor leading to door 5. When they reached it, Tim first tried the keys from the previous locks, and their good fortune continued. The key for door 4 also opened door 5. However, they then faced door 6, which was clearly more reinforced and had a different appearance. Tim immediately began working on its lock while Alex kept watch from the doorway of door 5, alert for any sign of the guard returning. During this time, the guard was conducting his inspection round, checking each cell one by one and peering through the small windows. As the guard inspected each cell, peering through the small windows, he saw the blankets shaped to look like someone was sleeping underneath them. Their friend Stephen, who was in his cell, was tense as he watched the guard search, aware that his friends knew the guard typically took about 15 minutes to complete his inspection round. They had set themselves a 10-minute window to operate within, after which they needed to return immediately. At that moment, Tim was trying to unlock the 6th door. He first tried all the keys he had, but none opened the lock. He continued his attempts, using metal wires, among other things, but all efforts failed. The tension peaked, literally causing their hands to tremble. When their self-imposed 10-minute window was up, Alex urgently told Tim that they had to go back. They were out of time. Tim pleaded for just a bit more time to try, but the situation reached a point where Alex had to physically pull him away. They quickly retreated back through the corridor to the stairs and hid again in the small cupboard. Moments later, they heard the guard descending the stairs. It was a close call. Had they delayed even slightly longer, they would likely have been caught. Finally, they were able to breathe a sigh of relief after seeing the guard pass through door 4 and head back towards his office. They then cautiously emerged from the cupboard, ascended the stairs to the 2nd floor, and safely returned to their cells. Tim felt a sense of defeat, even though he had managed to get past at least one door, the 5th door. Tim was determined to get past more than just one door in a single night. The risk involved in each excursion was high, and the more they ventured out, the higher the probability of getting caught. Tim felt the 6th door's lock to be one of the most difficult in the prison, which made the stress and pressure of that particular night so intense that he couldn't even fall asleep. He was resolved not to attempt the 6th door again unless he was certain of success. He wasn't willing to risk multiple unsuccessful tries. He needed to breach that door quickly. During this period, Tim didn't just make keys for the doors along their planned escape route. He also crafted keys for various other doors within the prison. One of these was a nearly hidden side door that could lead them to the workshop, and he made a key for the workshop door as well. The workshop itself had multiple doors on different sides, so he created keys that could allow them to sneak in and take tools whenever needed, essentially making Tim carry a set of keys like one of the prison guards. However, his primary concern remained the lock on door number 6. He brainstormed a new way to create a special key for this door, one that had a high chance of success. Eventually, he came up with an innovative design, a key made of metal wires, but with a wooden handle, or rather, a handle that could interchange multiple wooden heads quickly. This design would allow him to switch between different heads rapidly, adapting as needed to the lock's requirements. The second advantage of Tim's new key design was that it allowed him to manipulate the key inside the lock more easily. The metal wires could enter deeper into the lock, enabling him to move the key head up and down at various angles, something he couldn't achieve with the standard wooden keys. This flexibility meant that the wooden key head didn't need to match the lock's shape exactly, giving him greater leeway in opening the locks. Once Tim completed this design, he felt confident that he had the right tools to finally open door number 6 without any doubt. His ambition didn't stop there. He wanted to pass through all the doors in one go, on a single night. However, this would obviously require more time, so they needed their friend Stephen, who would stay behind in his cell, to find a way to distract the guard and extend his inspection round. On the night they decided to execute their plan. As soon as the music started, Tim and Alex began their move. They both exited their cells, descended the stairs together, and hid in the cupboard under the stairs. They'd waited there until the music stopped. Then, as they saw and heard the guard pass by and head up to the cells, they quickly moved from the 4th door to the corridor and on to the 5th door, which Tim opened with the key from the 4th. Now it was time for the 6th door. Meanwhile, back at the cells, Stephen began his part of the plan to keep the guard occupied. His strategy was simple. He knew the guard was a rugby enthusiast, a popular sport in South Africa. So he started a conversation about recent games, discussing who won and who lost, and the match's highlights. The guard, eager to talk about his favorite sport, got drawn into the conversation, inadvertently giving Tim and Alex more time to work on the doors. Meanwhile, Tim was attempting to unlock the 6th door using the wire key, testing it with 3 different wooden heads. As mentioned before, the wire design allowed him greater freedom to move the key within the lock, adjusting the angles and range of motion extensively. He maneuvered the key left, right, up and down, trying every possible method to unlock it. Finally, he heard the satisfying click of the lock opening, reigniting his and Alex's enthusiasm. They quickly passed through the 6th door and found themselves facing the 7th. The 7th door was made of iron bars, and its lock was immediately identified by Tim as easy to tackle since its screws were externally visible. One of the tools at their disposal was a bread-cutting knife, which the prison administration allowed them to keep in their cells. Although it was a small, not very sharp knife, Tim used it to unscrew the lock quickly, then tampered with the lock's internals to ensure it could be opened with a simple motion of a wire or metal piece. Now, the lock on the 7th door could be opened with just a slight manipulation. They moved on to the 8th door, which, to their good fortune, was already open. Proceeding through, they reached door number 9, whose lock was similar to the ones they had encountered before. Tim immediately tried the keys he had and discovered that the 9th door could be unlocked with the same key that opened both the 4th and 5th doors. Back at the cells, Stephen was still engaging the guard in conversation. After exhausting all rugby-related topics, he switched to talking about his life and family, continuing to distract the guard effectively. This allowed Tim and Alex to move unimpeded through the prison doors, leveraging every moment to advance their escape plan. However, Stephen certainly couldn't distract the guard indefinitely, so his friends needed to complete their mission quickly and return. They then reached the 10th door. By this point, they realized time was running out, and they should head back. The 10th door was an ordinary wooden door, like those found in apartment buildings, and it was supposed to lead directly outside the prison. It didn't exit to the outer yard or any other area within the prison, but directly outside. The lock on this door was clearly different from the others, and they didn't have time to experiment with it. So they decided to leave it be and quickly made their way back to the staircase, hiding again in the cupboard underneath as they waited for the guard to descend. Indeed, within a minute or two, the guard came down. As soon as he passed through the fourth door, they emerged from the cupboard, ascended the stairs, and returned to their cells. That night marked a significant achievement. They had managed to bypass every door except the last one. The following day, the three convened in the prison yard, as usual, to discuss their next steps. They felt it was finally time to escape. True, they hadn't opened the 10th door yet, but with the experience they had accumulated, they felt confident they would find a way to do so. This time, Stephen would join them in the escape attempt, meaning he wouldn't be in his cell to distract the guard and delay him, as they needed to delay the guard for as long as possible on this final attempt. As I mentioned before, the section they were in housed political prisoners, so they all shared the same mindset and supported each other. Even though their fellow inmates in the section were not escaping with them, they were prepared to support their endeavors. Such cooperation among prisoners in an ordinary prison would be nearly impossible. Political prisoners typically only collaborate like this if they share similar ideologies and charges against the government. The person considered the leader of the political prisoners in this prison was named Dennis Goldberg. Dennis had told them he would help distract the guard. Their plan involved cutting the electricity to their section. The circuit breaker was located on the staircase they used after exiting the section door. By cutting the power, Dennis could call the guard to address the issue, thus ensuring the guard was preoccupied. The day they had all been preparing for was December 11, 1979. The three were extremely excited, but also very nervous. However, they tried to calm their nerves and focus on their task. The first step was to change into civilian clothes they had stolen from one of the buildings within the prison. As I mentioned earlier, they had made keys for various doors within the prison, not just the 10 on their escape route, which allowed them to steal some tools and the civilian clothes. These clothes were a crucial part of the plan because if they escaped in prison uniforms, they would be easily noticed by guards or even people outside. Dressed in their civilian clothes, they waited for the guard to start playing music as usual. As soon as the music began, Tim moved to unlock his cell door and then the outer door using the broomstick key. He then quickly freed Stephen and Alex from their cells. Dennis watched them from his cell window and confirmed that he would call the guard as soon as they cut the power. The three then left the section door. Everything was set for their escape. As they descended the stairs, Alex opened the electrical box and began tampering with the wires inside, complicating them in such a way that it would be difficult for anyone to quickly resolve the issue, ensuring that the guard would be delayed when he came to investigate. Afterward, all three of them squeezed into the small cupboard located under the stairs. This was the first time all three would hide together in such a cramped space. Above in the cells, Dennis began shouting to attract the guard's attention, alerting him that the power and lights had gone out. Moments later, the three hiding in the cupboard heard the footsteps of the guard slowly moving along the corridor, their tension peaking for fear that the cupboard doors might burst open as they had during a previous attempt. However, the guard passed through the fourth door and climbed the stairs without noticing them, heading into the cell section. Once the guard was out of sight, Tim, Stephen, and Alex emerged from the cupboard and made their way from the fourth door to the corridor and toward the fifth door. Reaching the cell section, the guard was surprised to find the lights off and the power cut. Dennis, who had been calling him, told him that the electricity had suddenly gone out, but he didn't let the guard go to check the electrical issue right away. Instead, he engaged him in conversation to further delay him. Meanwhile, Tim, Stephen, and Alex reached the fifth door and, using the same key that opened the fourth door, passed through it with ease. They then faced the sixth door, which, as mentioned before, had the most challenging lock. However, they were prepared with the specially designed wire key and managed to open it within a few attempts, taking only 2 or 3 minutes. The 7th door consisted of bars. Tim had already tampered with its lock, allowing it to be easily opened with any simple tool. They successfully bypassed the 7th door, and as usual, the 8th door was open. The 9th door opened with the same key that had unlocked the 4th and 5th doors. Then, they approached the small staircase leading to the 10th door. Tim immediately began testing the keys he had on the lock of this final door, but none of them worked. He tried one key after another, and with each failed attempt, his tension escalated. It was his worst nightmare at this point, that none of the keys would open the lock on the 10th door. Tim, having crafted many keys and unlocked numerous locks, had reached a point where he felt like a professional locksmith and hadn't anticipated being stumped by the last lock. Meanwhile, Dennis had finished distracting the guard, who began walking towards the staircase to address the electrical issue. Upon reaching the circuit breaker, the guard started trying to fix the problem and adjust the wires. The 3 prisoners were still at the door, spending nearly 20 minutes in their efforts to unlock it, but without success. Eventually, the guard managed to restore the electricity and complete his inspection round, then started making his way back to his office. The 3 heard his footsteps as he returned and heard him opening his office door, which meant the guard was now between them and their cells. If they considered returning, they would have to pass in front of his office. Tim suggested they return to their cells and try another day, considering it a risk since they would have to pass by the office where the guard was present. However, Stephen and Alex disagreed. They were determined that they needed to escape now. They believed they couldn't miss this opportunity, even though Tim thought returning to their cells was the safer option. The urgency of the situation and their contrasting views brought them to a critical decision point in their escape plan. There was no turning back now. Alex took a metal tool they had stolen from the workshop and decided to try breaking the lock. This was one of the tools for which they had made a key. Tim objected, warning that trying to break the lock would make a loud noise that could attract the guard's attention, but Alex was determined. He began to pry into the wooden frame around the lock. The door, by the way, was made of wood, not reinforced like the 6th door, which had been the only armored one. As Alex chipped and dug at the wood, the noise was indeed loud and alarming. Tim kept watch over the corridor, terrified that the guard might emerge from his office at any moment. Alex continued to work on the door until it suddenly swung open before them. It seemed the guard had not heard them, as he did not come out of his office. Their joy in that moment was indescribable, but they knew they had to control their emotions and not let their excitement carry them away, as they were still within the prison's bounds. They quietly opened the door and walked out normally, keeping their heads down to avoid recognition, yet trying not to arouse suspicion. However, just a short distance from the door, they saw a car with 2 prison guards standing beside it, apparently off duty and heading home. Their hearts pounded fiercely, but they maintained their composure and kept walking. The guards gave them a glance or two, but then continued chatting among themselves. In the end, the 3, dressed in civilian clothes, didn't logically appear to be inmates who had made it that far outside, blending into the environment as just another few faces in the crowd. The 3 continued walking until they had moved far enough from the prison and reached one of the main streets of the city. It was only then that they finally allowed themselves to breathe a sigh of relief and truly feel the joy and triumph of their successful escape plan. Usually, at this point in escaped stories, we reach the sad part where the escapees are captured soon after their flight. However, I'm pleased to tell you that this story is different. These 3 had arranged with a man from Zimbabwe, a neighboring country to South Africa, who was a smuggler. They had agreed that he would help them escape to Zimbabwe. And indeed, they left South Africa and reached Zimbabwe. From there, they moved on to Zambia and then Tanzania. And from Tanzania, they managed to fly to London, where they settled and lived until the Apartheid regime in South Africa ended in 1994. It's unclear whether they ever returned to South Africa or continued living in London or elsewhere. Tim later wrote a book titled Escape from Pretoria, in which he recounted the events of their daring escape in great detail. This book was even adapted into a dramatic film. Following this, Tim appeared in documentaries and gave lectures and seminars around the world about their remarkable escape story. And there we have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.